Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Holistic Human Optimization Show. I am your host, as always, Ronnie Landis. And wow, today we have quite the gift, quite the episode for all of you. This is something I have been looking forward to for a number of months. And so I just want to set a quick context for our special edition today. We have two gentlemen that I consider to be mentors, role models, and also big brothers in a way, as we've continued to connect together through our work or through my connection with them, particularly through this podcast, because I've interviewed both of these individuals. Mr. Nick Good, I've interviewed previously about a couple months ago. If you haven't heard that episode, I really encourage you to go back to it. And then I've interviewed Richard Rudd about twice. So this will be the third time that he's been on. And so let me just do a very informal introduction, because this is a very special context. We're bringing two living masters on, which is actually something I've always wanted to do, but I've never been able to really kind of coordinate everybody's time zones. And not everybody, as is funny enough, not everybody wants to share the spotlight. But these two individuals are, they really, I'm not going to go into the whole thing of how this started. That would take away from the time. But basically, Nick Good, as an informal introduction, to me, Nick Good, what he really is a human potential teacher from a spiritual perspective, and really works on embodiment practices and helps people focus their soul energy, helps them access the signature of their soul, which is maybe something that we can get into. That's a little bit of my language, but that's my interpretation. That's really the gift that he's had on my life and his teachings. And Mr. Richard Rudd is the founder of the incredible work, The Gene Keys. And that's actually how this conversation started. And so we're going to go a little bit deeper into that, but I want to set a little bit of a context. And so thank you so much to both of you for joining me on this call, and bringing both of your voices to my audience, but bringing it together. I think we're going to have an incredible time. So without further ado, the way that I want to set this up, and we'll start with you first, Richard. I feel like the best way to open up this conversation would be to just have each of you share a distillation of your background and the focal point of your vocational work in the world as it pertains to the greater context of this conversation, which is about personal and collective transformation. So I'll start with you, Richard, and then we'll move on to Nick.
Hi, thanks, Ronnie, and it's lovely to be here, and welcome everyone who's watching live or live or dead. I was going to say, let's start with a joke. So my name's Richard Rudd. My background, I guess, I'm a very ordinary guy. I'm a dad. I have kids. I live at home in Devon, England, and I guess what was it, 1996? I had an extraordinary experience in my late 20s that kind of changed my life. One of those mystical encounters we sometimes hear about, and I think each one's unique, and everyone has their own story to tell. But to distill it all, I think in what it did is it set my life on a particular trajectory, that the path less traveled, if you like. And from that, I became a sort of, I guess, a great searcher, a seeker, and traveled all over the world, searching and seeking for an answer to what had happened inside me in that experience I had, in which I was kind of flooded with light, is the best way to put it, for 3 days and 3 nights, and kind of one with all things. So through that journey, I gradually found myself compiling a body of wisdom, although I didn't know I was doing that, until it all started to slot together. And then I wrote this book called The Gene Keys, in which I encapsulated and condensed a lot of the wisdom that I had sort of experienced using the vehicle of the I Ching. The I Ching became, like the Chinese I Ching, became the structure that helped me to open up and expand the kind of wisdom teaching, or the transmission, or the stream that I received at that point back in my life. And it's a constant unfolding for me. It's still a living experience, and I continue to teach out of that experience and out of that stream that is a live thing. So it's my teaching is a live experience that's constantly pouring and is constantly new. And I rarely repeat things, because I might repeat certain stories, but it's always new, and so there's always something new emerging. And so I'm on this journey of to put it into the context of what you asked, Ronnie, about the collective awakening. The essence of what Gene Keys is all about is to give people an individual route of empowerment that allows them to follow their own course, intuitive course, but using structures provided by the Gene Keys teachings that allows them to find their own route, their own unique route, without the need for a teacher. Although teachers, that doesn't preclude that teachers are wonderful and can be very helpful. So that's sort of the essence of Gene Keys, and the kind of reason, in a way, it's here, I feel, is for this next stage in our evolution. That we're standing on a precipice, in a way, and a new being is kind of beckoning us towards itself, and it's our higher expression of humanity, and of us living all the virtues that are inside us, living at a much at a much higher frequency. That's one of the ways I sometimes talk about it. And they're called the Gene Keys because they are a set of codes, and those codes are found inside our DNA, and they're also replicated throughout creation. And it's the same codes that are codified in the structure of the I Ching that are reflected in the cosmos, and as I said, in our DNA. So it is a wonderful map for mapping all the possible states of human consciousness, from the shadow and the dark, difficult aspects of our psyche up to the most exalted experiences that humanity can attain. So that's really what the Gene Keys is, and I hope that places me in a little bit of context for people who've never heard of me before.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the Gene Keys, because that's the connective tissue that brought this conversation together. And Nick has been working very deeply with the Gene Keys. He actually did an incredible reading on me a little while ago, which was incredibly insightful. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into that. Thank you, Richard. And then so for you, Nick, same basic question, like distill for us a little bit your background and your vocational focus in the world.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, first of all, I'd just like to qualify that I would say I'm a student, an eternal student here. I wouldn't put the master tag on Nick Good at the moment, and enjoying being a student in the infinite, eternal garden. I guess I've been following the hero's journey, and quite reluctantly at the beginning, because I was just born into pretty unusual and challenging circumstances in the United Kingdom, in the county of Lincolnshire, which has the highest concentration of practicing Satanists in England. And they get up to all kinds of tricks, especially around certain times of the year. And I was born in 1961 in this little farmhouse, cold, windy place. And it actually had a ghost in the house, a little ghost that was been there for a few generations since my family had been living in the house, my grandparents and my dad and his sisters and so forth. So there was a doorway to the astral plane through the presence of this ghost. And then when the Satanists did their thing, they would invoke and bring in entities from the lower astral plane. And they would, literally come through my bedroom when I was a little kid. So I had this terrifying ordeal to deal with, which damaged me severely as a child. Plus, I was growing up in a loveless environment where people didn't touch, and there was no, there were no displays of affection going. So it created this kind of sort of psycho-emotional trauma, which has kind of been a really wonderful gift, because it was a severe enough to warrant a lot of focus from me, just to get onto a level playing field where I could just participate in a functional way with others, with my environment. And but what I also had was this kind of wild spirit that didn't want to be tamed, that didn't want to be confined. And the wonderful thing about trauma, and there's a tremendous amount of it going on right now. I feel we're in a tremendously cathartic time right now, and there's so much trauma coming up, or people being traumatized. The wonderful thing about it is that it absolutely cracks the shell, the container of your psyche. And that's a very, very, very challenging experience, because it requires you to reconsider who you actually are, to get to grips with who you actually are and what you're actually dealing with, the tremendous forces, that are unleashed through that inside of us. And because we kind of live these, superficial, ego-centered lives, we don't have the kind of depth of sense of self that allows us to live from a place within us where we can live in balance, and we can actually find a center within ourselves where we actually are quite good at dealing with these extremely powerful forces within us. And so I guess my journey has been all about that deepening of one sense of self, and going into the, what mythologically is called the descent into ashes and grief. This is definitely a downward spiraling journey through your own darkness to a place of, tremendous light and goodness and strength within yourself, which we all possess. And because this sort of journey takes you from the physical through the mental, through the emotional, into this this other landscape within us. It's a feeling world, let's just call it a spiritual landscape, and it still requires you to feel and to navigate. And I just generally term this realm, this arena within us, the soul consciousness, where we're going beyond our physical, mental, emotional world, which goes with the body, mind persona, into this other sense of self, which I call soul consciousness. And so I've been living in that world for, pretty much all my life, and just, stumbling around, bumbling around, trying to make sense of it all. And things, as they do, you persevere on a path, and you explore enough and study enough and practice enough, and you get to grips with things. And hence this, student to master, evolution. And then I guess about, I'm not sure how many years ago now, maybe 6 or 7 years ago now, I came across the gene keys. And I started studying this, and it just all made, it was just really easy for me to understand. It was like it was so easy. It was like having suddenly now you have a map. That's what I perceived the gene keys, the hologenetic profiles, as a map. And I'd already, been doing sessions with people, and, for years before that. And I was, entraining through our soul, the connection of our souls, which is just through sensitivity. And if you live from that depth within yourself, it's very easy to connect with someone on that level, because you're living from it within yourself. And then just asking simple questions about where they've been and where they feel like they're going, you get a lot of what the map, gives you. And so I was already able, I was doing it without the maps. And then when the maps came, it was like, my goodness, this is like really easy now. This thing's rad. So that really endeared me to studying the Gene Keys system. And the thing about Rich is he's so humble that he basically, he's brought this wonderful thing into the world, but he also, he doesn't dominate with his ego about, how it should be interpreted and all the rest of it. And he gives you permission to, organically, relate to the teachings in your own way, and it gives you the confidence to draw your own conclusions about certain things. And that's a real gift from the teacher there to the students. So it's been amazing. And this last little thing I'd just like to say, from my perspective, the way I perceive what Rich was saying about the I Ching, and the thing about it is that the ego, the perspective we have on reality, that thinks, something is happening to you, and you don't really know what it is, and you don't even know who you are. This kind of superficial sense of self that we all have to navigate out of. That the other part of us, the real part of us, the eternal part of us, the part of us that life is holding perfectly and is providing the perfect challenge and potentially the gifts by the life situations that we're in, including every single detail of your life. Well, that's all going on in this wonderful matrix of energy that this what we perceive as reality is made of. And of course, the I Ching it gives you insight into how the energy is actually constructed for you as an individual. That's why it's a divination system. You can predict certain things about possible and probable futures from the guidance of the I Ching. So I just see it as when the soul incarnates or projects the form into the world, whatever you want to say, when the personality begins its gestation in the womb and all of that, and is born into the world, the energy of creation is perfectly configured to you as an individual. And because the energy world is a mirror, it's a mirror of what's going on in that soul, in that consciousness. And that those 64 gene keys correspond perfectly to those 64 codons in your DNA, which obviously they would do if creation is supporting your evolution. And then the gene keys give you this wonderful map of how to navigate out of your shadow world, which is your ego's experience, into this greater, more expansive sense of self, which is just a joy to exist in. And that is, the purpose of life. And it's just a wonderful tool. So I'm very, very grateful. And we're having good fun over here doing Gene Keys readings and incorporating them into all kinds of different fun programs that I do.
Fantastic. I love that both of you basically dove into the second question I had. So that's actually perfect. And I don't want to, one of the things, my intention for facilitating this was that I was going to minimize my participation or my opinions or my thoughts to the distillation of relevance to give both of you as much time as possible. I just want to say, though, with that, the Gene Keys has been profound for me in my community. And I'm in a community of kind of a multidimensional community of entrepreneurs, healers, physicians, doctors, nutritionists, chiropractors, physiotherapists, different types of teachers and coaches. And the Gene Keys is having this reverberating emergence. What I mean by that, it seems to be the Gene Keys from when I first heard about it is like emerging, or maybe it's because I heard about it in my reality, I'm seeing it emerge. Maybe that's what's really happening. In my circles of very powerful leaders, it seems to be this reference point that everybody's latched onto and has had a transformative effect. I'm seeing an incredible ripple effect with it, and obviously a testament to that is Nick Good sharing his experience. And I want to hand it back to you, Richard, and just see, do you have any thoughts in response to what Nick shared? Did anything come up for you before we move on with the conversation?
Well, it was nice to hear, Nick, your story of your early childhood in a way. I mean, even though it was obviously very traumatic. And I totally agree with you that this is a very trauma-laden time we're in. But I think humans have always experienced trauma and suffering. But it seems like, because the world is actually generally more peaceful than it has been, in the past. I mean, it may not seem like that for some people. There is there's more prosperity externally than there ever has been. And again, that's not the case for lots of people, but generally prosperity is on the rise across all the nations of the world. And what that does is it enables people to kind of slightly relax and start to kind of ask questions, especially when they have their needs met, and then they can consider, if I have all my needs met and I'm still not happy, what the hell is wrong? And that's when teachings like these become useful, because they point to the source of where is the trauma inside us. And every single human being alive has some trauma literally in their DNA. And even if you had you're carrying it, you're carrying ancestral trauma anyway on behalf of your ancestors. We all are. And going down our ancestral lineages, and those are memories that are actually stored in us for a certain amount of generations. And my feeling is that actually, you never shake all those memories until you've kind of done the transformational work inside yourself. So I think that's a really kind of poignant thing that you said there, Nick, about suffering and the nature of suffering. And of course, it's the basis of many of the great teachings like Buddhism and Taoism and even Christianity, and to look into and try and understand the nature of suffering inside us, but not just as a whole species, but individually. Like, what is it that kind of really did it for me? And it's not about even having to understand that. It's about, again, as the work you're doing, Nick, is about going into the body and finding it in the body. And that means not just the physical body, but also the emotional body, and being able to learn its language and find those patterns in the Gene Keys. We call them shadows. And one of the basis of the Gene Keys is this kind of sentence: every shadow contains a gift. So there's this notion of, once you kind of understand the shadow patterns, there's a sort of authenticity to that. Once you really can learn to accept them and embrace them, and that's an uncomfortable process in the beginning, that that kind of has its stages and phases as you begin to kind of open into, like, well, what is the source of this trauma in my life, and why does it keep leading me into like distressing situations, or difficult relationships, or health problems, or money problems or whatever. It's all rooted in the same kind of trauma, the wound, or I call the sacred wound.
Yeah.
So, getting to the bottom of that is really important, but not necessarily. My understanding is we don't have to really understand everything. We have to kind of embrace everything. So, and that's when we get to the core of that, we begin to find the light, because the light kind of hidden. I mean, that's one of the great tricks of the gods, if you like, or is to place the brightest, most beautiful treasure in the darkest place. Like in all the legends that we learn of the fairy tales. You find those treasures by going down, as you said, Nick, by descending. You descend down into the matter. You descend down into the places of discomfort. You have to have the courage and the valor to face them inside yourself, and to be responsible for them, and to feel them, and to kind of nurture yourself, and to parent yourself, and what I call bring yourself back from the dead. Because in a way, every time the heart closes, we've had those experiences where we're having an argument with someone, and then we just feel like this clench across our chest, and it's like it's gone. Whatever opening we had there, it's just gone. And we all know that feeling. But then, how do you bring yourself back from that feeling? And that's what I'm talking about, like the ability to be able to go in and parent yourself and nurture your heart back to life. And the more you can do that, and the better you get at doing that, and the quicker you can bring it back to life, and the more emotionally kind of literate you become, the more like we've heard of this expression EQ. Our EQ, our ability to resonate emotionally, to understand things emotionally. This is a really important time in our evolution to kind of develop our EQ. Not just our IQ, but our EQ, to develop this sensitivity to each other, to ourselves, to learn the gentleness that's needed to kind of begin to allow our heart to open again. And I've said, one of the great revelations for me about this thing that everyone calls awakening, has been that awakening for me is a series of softenings. It's not this it's not this big impossible thing. It's a series of softenings that we the heart opens in layers, and once it doesn't open like if you force it, and it doesn't open through mental understanding, although that can be a kind of a bridge. It's like it opens when we kind of soften inside ourselves and begin to learn this self-love, and begin to take care of ourselves and nurture our own trauma and bring ourselves back from the dead. And I think that's kind of our great challenge, to develop and evolve that more feminine side of our nature, regardless of whether male or female. It's like it is a feminine spirit that's inside us, that knows how to take care of us, and we're here to sort of relearn that, remember that, so that we can kind of approach the world, again with an open heart, and maintain that open heart. So yeah, I think that's central to what my life's all about, anyway.
And it's I was just spinning there while you were saying, we got three men on here, and I remember when Ronnie first put this out for us to come together, Rich was like, "Do you think it's a bit too much masculine energy?" I think it's great that three men are talking about softening and feeling, and I'm all about this. And you got King Richard there, and a couple of like hardcore warrior brothers here. We've definitely come the warrior's journey, and the whole beginning of that is toughening, hardening, and with all those physical practices and smashing and bashing and all of that, and then the evolution of that is very much this this journey into mastery, is this becoming exquisitely sensitive. And this is where the soul's This is where the soul resides. It is pure sensitivity and receptivity itself. You can't get anything more sensitive than a soul. So I think one of the dialogues, one of the things that terrifies a lot of men that are stuck in the toxic warrior archetype, that are still smashing and bashing their way through life and living in the material world, armored up and putting on more armor daily, just to survive and achieve in that matrix. One of the words that terrifies them is this, this vulnerability word that's become a bit of a buzzword in the women's circles. The women calling out to the men to be more vulnerable, and this conjures up images of men, melting down, having emotional breakdowns, and all of this. And if a lot of workshops that people are running, that is the specific goal. A lot of men's workshops, a lot of women's workshops. The specific goal is to break the men down into quivering, blubbering, sniveling heaps. Yeah, and this doesn't vibe with the real warrior archetype. We're not interested in freaking quivering, blubbering, sniveling heaps, but we are interested in vulnerability and sensitivity on this inner path, this inner journey. So as we're softening within ourselves, and this is a very, very, very private, intimate practice. This is Jesus saying, go into your closet and shut the doors and pray, pray in secret with your mother, father, God. This is where you're opening, using your sensitivity and vulnerability to open to that which is within and above you. That's where the sensitivity and the vulnerability is required first and foremost. And as you do that, then it allows you to meet the world around you with more sensitivity and compassion. But the other way around, it doesn't work. It creates a more dysfunctional male, from my observations. And you've got this feminization of the men now, which is a false feminization. It's the women, over masculinized women that are, following a kind of a toxic warrior archetype that they've seen that the men are doing. So they're taking control, kind of stamping the foot down and taking the hold of the power stick and demanding this, that, and the other of the men. And the men are following a kind of a toxic feminine archetype, which is the blubbering, sniveling, melting, emotionally unstable thing. And it's not working. So what I do a lot in my stuff, working with men and women, a lot of leaders and teachers in the communities around the world, is introduce them to this other possibility. And so that little bit about the vulnerability and the sensitivity going within, the receptivity and what I say a lot, use very often the term using the beauty of your own tenderness to connect with that which is within you. So the wound, all the wounds, the gifts are in the wounds, and we get wounded by living in that shadow world. But it creates this supreme vulnerability and sensitivity. And within that tenderness, on the edge of that tenderness, there's so much beauty. And if you can use that beauty as an organ of receptivity for your spirit within yourself, then you're really on the money. So I encourage a lot. So that's kind of like the feminine aspect. And then the masculine aspect is simply, for me, is this real certainty, this absolute certainty of who you are, the burning faith. And this, conjures up the image of, the sword and the stone and the spear and the arrow, the flaming spear, this strong, noble, unwavering, unshakable, invincible, warrior archetype is your own faith, your own certainty in who you are eternally, and your connection to life and relationship to life, to God, whatever you want to call it, that exists eternally. And is always, it's a constant, and it's absolutely irrelevant what you believe and what you emote and what you think and what you do as a person. That never actually changes. And I think the real call for the warrior is to stand in the certainty of that while he's merging that with his own vulnerability, and sensitivity to be a living conduit of that, of the beauty of that grace that's within and around us all. So it's the most delightful edge of the blade and this kind of trembling, fledgling bird kind of feeling.
Wow.
I had a dream recently. It was a really powerful dream, and in it there was a chasm. It was a very classic kind of archetypal dream. There's a chasm, like a valley, deep canyon, and there's a kind of there's a kind of bridge that's not that kind of doesn't go all the way across, and then down in the bottom is water, but also there are tigers. So there were these two powerful tigers down in the valley, and then as I was watching, this man ran and just leapt across the chasm, like effortlessly, almost like he was just like not even where it was there. And I gasped. I was like, "Wow, that was incredible!" And he just ran off. And then another man ran and jumped, tried to follow him, and fell into the chasm and fell into the water. And I could see the tigers coming to get him. And actually, the second man lay. He kind of, after realizing he couldn't escape, he lay down and he surrendered, and he allowed the tigers to devour him. And so I was both those people. I was both those men. And what I realized is that both paths were perfect. And instead of thinking like I have to succeed, I have, that to get to that stage where it's effortless, that comes in its own time. The jump of initiation comes in its own time. You can't beat it. So you can't kind of make it quicker. So it was a really powerful dream in that sense, but because you might think that the one that fell, that there was something wrong, that there was like, oh, I failed, that one failed, that part of me failed, that's the failing part of me. But actually that's also a great learning, to be able to surrender, and then to allow yourself to be kind of consumed, and to realize, to have the maturity and to be that vulnerable, to allow life to just do what it does to you, and knowing that you're both. It's that we are both, and at different times we're both, and we are. It was a really good reminder of that.
I have to jump in for just a moment, and I really just want to do it for a moment. This is really an amazing experience for me, to be a participatory fly on the wall. I'm usually the one having the dialogue, which is great and amazing, but to actually be able to sit here and watch both of you essentially elucidate every single point in question that I had without me actually having to ask any questions is pretty amazing. Every single point has actually been kind of brought into the conversation already around archetypes, around the masculine, the feminine. I mean, I guess it's kind of the intention that kind of goes to show that the power of the intention is real, and that it does have an effect on what it is that you're intending on. And so with that said, I kind of want to just bring something into this to make sure that we're able to bring it up without stopping the flow. Both of you, well, you, Nick, you really brought it up, but you also have kind of brought this up too, Richard, and I want to get your perspectives on this around the masculine and the feminine as archetypical representations of the human experience, whether you're a man or a woman. The conversation that we're having right now is a lot about, I think, about healthy masculinity, the evolution of masculinity with the integration of femininity. And I want to bring in a little bit more around archetypical literacy, because that word's been used, and a lot of people may not have a reference point for archetypical and mythological literacy. They may be in what I call literalism, which in my understanding is really the it's the left brain hyper, like taking everything literal, but they may not understand what an archetype is, what we mean by kind of like the feminine. If they are a man, for example, like what does it mean to actually get in touch with our feminine? So those are just some thoughts I want to put in the pool. I'm going to let you guys take it from there. Whichever one of you feels inspired to lead with those thoughts.
After you, Rich.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, if to make it really simple for people, I think it's important. So as I mentioned earlier, whether you're a man or a woman, the pathway to awakening, might have a slight variation, but it's always going to be through the heart. Through the ability, through kind of finding the place of love inside us that connects us to everything. That was the experience that I had when I was younger, and it's been my reference point ever since that. And so I think that's that is the common ground between men, women, and no matter what your preference is or what you kind of however you play within the theater of gender, because it is a theater. I see it as a theater. However you dress yourself, however your sexual inclination and all of that, or whether you're an older person even, and you're kind of, and you just find that whether you're in lost interest or you're whatever, it's still the theater. And so at one level, I think it's important to kind of realize that that's a playground, and not to get too fixated on the identity that you take on, because it's just an identity. It's a costume, your gender, and your kind of relationship to your gender, masculine, feminine. And the issues that come with both, and the crossing over of both, and the androgynous kind of games that we play, and all of that stuff. It's all there to be explored by humanity, and we are exploring it, I think. And it's a stepping stone along the way, because at a certain point, we, in order to enter into that heart space, we actually have to let go of the gender. Because the heart space is actually the transcendence of gender, because it's like it doesn't make to the heart, it makes no difference whether you're yin yang, male, female, dog, bird. It's all it feels is the connection. And so that's I think that's a really important thing to keep remembering. And I haven't really answered your question fully, Ronnie, but I think that's the kind of baseline for me, that it's the theater, and we need to kind of hold in the back of our being always, that idea that where we're moving towards is this opening of the heart, and that any technique or any teacher or teaching or anything that comes your way that helps you to do that.
Can you still hear me, Ronnie?
Yeah, I can hear you, Nick. Did we lose Richard?
Rich froze, didn't he? Let me just carry on with that while we get Rich back on. So the theatre, yeah, all the world's a stage. Shakespeare said it. All characters in the drama of life. When you deal with people like I do every day with trauma, like massive drama going on in their lives, terrible things happening this week, just some of the bullets, just some of what I've been dealing with this week. The sister died of cancer, left 2 children and the husband, the suicidal, depressive, who's self-harming herself, who's coming to stay with me for 3 weeks tomorrow, the stripper in the club who's trying to get out of that thing, the escort in New York who's just got so many guys on WhatsApping her, she's lost her fucking mind. the teacher, the trainer from Australia who's doing this, that, and the other. You know, she's running retreats, this, that, and the other. She's a complete basket case. She's a disaster. Doing a session for her yesterday. So when you're dealing with people consistently with emotionally charged drama going on in their lives, if you remove the human element from it, you take the person, the personality, the persona out of the picture, and just deal with pure energy dynamics. Instead of the drama, you deal with where is the consciousness stuck in the shadow worlds, and what's it experiencing while it's there. Well, when you take out the details of the drama of life, like this thing that, you know, all the world's a stage. If you go to the theater and you watch a play, there's all the furniture and all the props on the stage, and the people are acting out these scenes in this drama. And then as soon as the act is finished, the curtain comes down and all the furniture changes, and new people come on with new clothes, and then they play out the next act and the scenes in that act of that particular aspect of the drama. And that's life. That's life. That's the way that life goes forever. So the world we're living in right now, with all these buildings and high technology and politicians and high-tech war and all the rest of it, and the internet and information overload, these are just all bits of the furniture in the drama of life that's unfolding at the moment. What archetypes are, and mythological images, are energy patterns that have been there for a very, 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 very long time. They don't change when the furniture gets shifted from act to act. They're always there. So, for example, when we're talking about the masculine and feminine in the ego's terms, we're talking about sexuality. You have that's a man, that's a woman. And then there's this androgynous conversation now where, you know, just because I'm a man, I might want to act like a woman. Just because I'm a woman, I might act like a man. Transgender is, well, to act like a man so I can have an operation and change me into a man. I'm a man who wants to act like a woman. I can have an operation that actually changes me into a woman. So all of this is going on in the ego's world, the body, mind, emotional landscape, where everything changes. And this is a massive distraction. This whole LGBT conversation is a massive distraction away from genuine spirituality, away from, and that's not to devalue whatever you want to do, however you want to express yourself. But if you're investing all your time into it and focus into it, and you're identifying yourself as an LGBT person, and you're super emotionally charged and gung ho about pro or con, you're wasting your life in terms of the spiritual path that you should be on, because the real masculine and feminine question is going on in your soul. It's a lot deeper, and it doesn't require this overemphasis on the superficial elements in your world. And so tons of souls are being sucked into this conversation right now. And it's a huge amount of energy being invested in there, which would be massively enhanced by a little deeper introspection and contemplation about what actually masculinity and femininity is. And so archetypically, you know, it still requires you, whether you're a man or a woman, to stand unwavering in a solid sense of self that doesn't wobble, it doesn't fluctuate, it doesn't vibrate, it's not on an emotional roller coaster, it doesn't go up and down the emotional spectrum from hysterical joy to hysterical sadness. Your sense of self is deeper than that, and you can function from that place. You can take action in the world, and the action that you take is inspired by this feminine receptivity and sensitivity to your own spiritual light and love within yourself. So it's love in action. That's the archetypes of the masculine and the feminine is very simply love in action. And then your mythological images are just different forms that express this this action throughout history. So you have the mythological images of the hero. The hero is the big relevant one at the moment. Just about every movie and book and anything that we're interested in, massive TV shows and all of these things, all express this hero archetype where a reluctant hero goes on a journey that benefits humanity, and they get their ass kicked along the way, and along the way they learn a lot about themselves. And we're all on that journey, whether we like it or not, or even are aware of it or not. We're all on it. But the wonderful thing about it is the journey lasts forever. It's an eternal journey, and that's really good news. So where's Richard Rudd? Have we lost him on the eternal journey?
I think I'm here.
Oh, there he is. Oh, good. I couldn't see you on the screen, mate. I was just going
sorry about that. I fell into that crevasse.
Yeah, so glad to have you back. I wanted to, one things that you mentioned that I think is super relevant. It's interesting. Khalil Gibran once said that love is work made visible, or work is love made is made love visible. So to work, in other words, to work, the joy of work is to make love visible. And I just wanted to bring that little piece in from my perspective, because growing up as a type A warrior, martial artist, fatherless boy, traversing through and navigating through the world, I used that warrior archetype as a way to actually survive psychologically, emotionally. And at some point that got stuck, and I had to go through my own hero's journey, which has been the exploration and integration of my own divine femininity and understanding that part of the journey, which is where I'm at now, which is why this conversation I think is happening. And so, with that said, I want to bring in this concept, this idea of work, and why do we work? And I don't mean from an occupational perspective. I mean from a vocational perspective. And maybe we can talk about the distinction between the two, because what all of us have in common is we've found our vocation. And I think that really brings in this love element, this feminine kind of creation element, in terms of like, why do we work? As a man, for me, I can speak for me, the reason I do what I do is the preservation of the sacred, the preservation of life, the sanctity of life. I do the work I do because it's why I'm here, and I want to preserve life. I want to preserve the sacred. And that to me is that's obviously a very feminine protective thing. As a man, I want to protect that feminine qualitative essence in the world. And so, I'm going to stop there. I want to hand it over to you, Richard, and kind of get your perspective on that. Whatever comes up. It's not exactly a question, but I'd like to get your take anyways.
Yeah, I think, one of the first things, if you come and study Gene Keys, one of the first things you'll come to learn when you get one of these profiles is the what is your life's work? What is your life's work? What are you here to do? And then there's another place in your profile called your purpose. What is your core purpose? What are you here to bring? Who are you here to be? And so in a way, in the beginning, you already have like this kind of dichotomy of these two sides of our nature. The thing you're here to do, and the one you're here to be. And so life's work in the world, and then purpose, deep purpose. And both of that in a way are sort of, they're obviously deeply interconnected, because your being is what you bring to your doing. And if you're aligned, then your doing flows from your being. And so really the thing that actually really fulfills us is contacting the being inside us, because the doing is something that can change. You can be a plumber, or you can be a father, or you can be out of work, or you can be a bum, or you can be all kinds of things. I'm sorry, you can do all kinds of things, but you're going to be, that being is the key, really. So when you can anchor yourself in that being and in the highest aspect of that being, then you're a stable human being. You've really found a deep sense of stability, and I call that the core stability. And it takes some breakthroughs to come to that place, and that's the journey. That's part of the hero's journey that's described as you study your gene keys, as you kind of contemplate your gene keys, because you're going to get these codes, that specific gene keys, that are specific archetypes that kind of elucidate your journey and give you a sense of, okay, that's my shadow that I have to, that's the specific shadow I need to meet in my warrior's battle. That's the tiger I need to kind of make friends with, or allow it to devour me and then be transformed and then forgive and then move on. And whatever the shape of your journey is, the Gene Keys path helps you to kind of put an image around that and write a narrative, so that you can find this sense of, what am I here to do? Who am I here to be? And so I find that an incredible contemplation. And as I said, it takes some time to really dig into the being part, because that's the feminine part, and that's the part that many of us are not so good at finding, because in the modern world, where everything's about doing and everything's about achievement and everything's about goals, the being part is like, whoa, I don't want any of that. That part of me is like, I don't want any of that. I just want to sit here and look out the window at the trees and the flowers. So that is kind of, that's why I kind of call it the art of contemplation, which is the ability to kind of, it's something you learn about being, to stop and smell the roses, to take some time, not to be so possessed by the things of the world. I mean, they're wonderful. As I said, it's a theater, so we can enjoy it, and we should enjoy it. But the other side of nature is this deep feminine well, which is being. And I kind of encourage all these techniques, like pausing, like teaching people, reminding them, pause all the time in a day, pause regularly, take a deep breath, just take some moments. And when a pause comes your way, instead of going, oh, I need to get on, take the pause, enjoy the pause, and fill your day with pauses, and you'll see what a magical day it will become. And learn other arts like lingering, take your time with things, sauntering, don't rush so much, and plan your day around those slower processes that slow you down, so that you can imbibe the beauty and the wisdom of the world. And one of my great passions is poetry, and some of my favorite poetry is the ancient poetry of ancient China. And these little poems are like so short, they're literally like a couple of lines, and it's some guy sitting on a mountaintop, thousands of years ago, who just wrote these kind of beautiful lines, and they're just achingly lonely, kind of beautiful, haunting connections between a human and a pause and nature. So it's like they sometimes describe, they're sitting there and they just will describe maybe the bells in the distant valley ringing, or the bamboo kind of swaying in the breeze, or these beautiful archetypal moments, and they describe them so well. And those are the moments that matter the most in life. Not the kind of, I've kind of done all this, I've achieved this. It's like, those are not things that life will remember. What life will remember are those special, beautiful, soft, feminine moments. So yeah, that's That's the art of contemplation.
That's awesome, brother. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for reminding us of that.
Pleasure. I've just written a new book called The Art of Contemplation. It's coming out in January. Yeah, it looks
Wonderful.
it's not quite out yet, but that's
Look at that
it's
tiny
very
little
thin. Look how
sweet
thin
little
it is.
thing. Yeah, it's a bit different to the old G keys, brother, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I thought I'd take it easy on my readers.
Lao Tzu. So the I Ching is all bound up in that Chinese tradition, and the Tao Te Ching is replete with all that kind of energy that Rich just described. I listen to the Tao Te Ching almost daily. Stephen Mitchell's audiobook version. Have you ever come across that?
That's the best version I've ever come across, actually. I don't know the audio, but I've read it, and the translations are so crystal clear.
Stephen Mitchell reading his own book, the Tao Te Ching by Stephen Mitchell. Highly recommend anyone who's watching to listen to that. So this is an absolutely critical point Rich Rudd's making here. The art of being. So Ronnie's asking, what's the connection between what's the work factor? And I was talking about love in action. Rich is talking about the subtle art of being and having this pausing and lingering. Yeah. So we have these gaps in life. These gaps, this is where you can disengage your ego's fever. The ego's in this passionate fever to reinforce its own sense of self-importance. So it needs to feel busy, or it needs to be doing. It needs to, like if I'm the healer, then I need a sick person to heal. Yeah, this mad fever to do something. Yeah. So we're in a world now with the high tech. Everyone's addicted to their devices, and they're addicted to their devices for a very good reason, because those devices have been designed specifically to generate that addiction, that dopamine response. The guy that was involved in the creation of Facebook, the Indian guy who had the big press conference a few years ago, just basically saying, hey, look, we've created a monster here. This thing is designed to addict you to it with a dopamine reaction. That means, your fight, flight, fright response, your sympathetic nervous system, which keeps you in this doing, this frantic energy where you can't pause, you can't linger. And so as individuals trapped in their ego consciousness, locked into the shadow world, because they're too focused on the physical, mental, emotional sense of self, and they aren't able to disentangle themselves from that within themselves as a feeling experience. They're the ones that are getting swept along now in this ever increasingly intense and powerful tsunami of technology. This new G world that they're promoting at the moment, where that everything can be conducted. The internet and Wi-Fi and all kinds of other frequencies. Everything that can conduct will be conducting. It's going to become more and more challenging for us to actually have the ability to pause, to linger. So one of the key things to this is the breathing. And I'm always coaching people to do alternate nostril breathing, because alternate nostril breathing activates the parasympathetic central nervous system response. The consciousness that's extending from the soul into the physical world is meeting the world through the central nervous system, through the senses. So the consciousness is connecting with the world of form through the senses. So that sensory information through your eyes and your ears and so forth is going immediately into the central nervous system. But the central nervous system is under attack all the time with this dopamine reactivity and this fight, flight, fright response. People are, despite how much technology, how much prosperity they have, most people are their survival is being threatened, or their sense of survival. It's an ego-based fear reaction to what they perceive as the threats coming from around them. So it reinforces more and more and more of this sympathetic response, the fight, flight, fright, adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine. So people feel that they're trapped. Consciousness feels that it's trapped and it's getting more and more trapped. But the thing is, if you just take the breath and you use that alternate nostril breathing specifically, you only need to do it 3 times properly, all the way in and all the way out. Then you can have this genuine pause, where it's not just press pause in your continuum of busy. It's literally a pause where you move out of that physical, mental, emotional energy spectrum, where all the chaos and fear and all of that intense energy is, into a deeper experience within yourself, to an invisible landscape that's here, that's permanently here, and you connect with it, and you just feel how wonderful it is to be you, how wonderful it is to be alive, and how free you actually are, no matter how busy your super surface life is. So this is a really, really, really important thing.
Yeah, and the simplest thing.
Yeah, and the simplest thing. Yeah, totally. And we're really a bunch of addicts. Everyone that comes to me, they're just like babbling, la 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 la, and just justifying all these reasons why they should, why it's it's kind of like they have the right to continue living an insane life. And this what I love about the purpose, the core purpose gene key, is that it shows you the style you should be living your life, the way you should be walking down the road. I remember once I was in south of France, and I got mixed up with these guys that had birds of prey. Yeah, they had these magnificent birds of prey, these eagles and these hawks. And I remember I was standing next to this guy, and he had this fantastic hawk on his arm, this massive bird, but it had a hood on it, yeah. And he pulled this hood off, and the nobility of this bird, the wildness of this thing just hit me so strongly. And even though it was a slave, it was on his arm and tied up with jesses around on his leather thing there, and he had his hood on, and he had to freaking be tied to this thing and live in this cage and that. This thing was a slave to this guy. He hadn't lost one micro bit of his wildness, his pure spirit. And it just really blasted me. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's us. I'm in this world. I'm working my ass off for liberation and awakening. I'm a slave to the matrix, but man, my spirit ain't at all.
Richard, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about freedom, and freedom is like a really great contemplation to do, for yourself. Like, it's actually one of the key gene keys, like the 55th gene key is the key of freedom.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? And it's double freedom, isn't it? Freedom in the gift. It's amazing.
Yeah. Sorry?
What's the shadow again?
Victimization. So, we have this, like where am I a victim? That's the question of freedom. Where am I a victim? And it can be incredibly subtle when you go asking that question. You go, well, why, where do I not feel free? And the more you ask that question deeper and deeper and deeper, you realize the more you trap yourself. You are the one that is making yourself a victim. Like, even the subtler levels are like, you can even be a victim of thinking you need to be free. You put yourself under the pressure of like, but I don't feel free. That in itself is like, there's something in you that's still trapping yourself, because all states are allowed, and that actually is freedom. Freedom is where everything is accepted right now, right now, as you are, in all your pain and all your difficulty. That is actually freedom, the pure acceptance of that state. But the victimization will keep taking you away from that acceptance into the future, into like, I can get free. I'm going to get free tomorrow. If I do this and that and that, then I'll be free. It's an old chestnut, right? If I earn that much money and then I get to that and then I have a house and then or whatever, I'll be free then. right? And we all know that old chestnut, but it remains the kind of key thing that's in the way of freedom. So it's a paradox, because, like awakening, for example, awakening is both in the now, but it may also be in the future. It may be in a future now, because you're in this theater, you're on this trajectory. So there are layers of that awakening for us. And we have to kind of live in and dwell in those paradoxes. So I think freedom is the most amazing discussion point, really. I'm evolving a retreat next year based on freedom. It's going to be a 1-day retreat that anyone can take to contemplate this question of freedom. Where is freedom for me? And it's different for each person, actually. Even though it's the same in its core, but the journey there is different, because there are layers of judgment, of opinion, of complexity in the mind, as you said, Nick, of addictive patterns. We all have an addiction for something. All of us. We all have an addiction. Right. For there's some addiction running in us. And it's one of the gene keys again, the shadow is addiction. But the interesting thing about that one is that the highest essence is silence. So the only true addiction is silence, which is the end of addiction. Right? There's another beautiful paradox. I mean, that sounds all very wise and kind of stuff, but ultimately, addictions are things that have to be transformed. You've got to kind of change your addiction from an unhealthy one to a healthy one.
Yeah.
That's the only way you're going to be able to use that energy. So you find a healthy addiction. Like pausing is a really healthy addiction.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the moment you actually, and breathing, finding those times of like, and the more you do that in your day, then the more addictive it becomes, because you're like, want that space of, this is good. This feels good. This is nice. This is what life is about. So it's those things that we're playing with, those patterns that victimize us, that we allow to victimize us, that keep us from feeling free. It's up to us to kind of transform them by finding healthy addictions. And then we kind of, one day, we transcend that whole field altogether, because we just become, like you no longer pause consciously, you just pause naturally. Because there is a pause, so you pause. And you don't have to kind of think, I need to breathe now. By the way, my version of your alternate nostril breathing, which I love, by the way, very ancient practice, is also very simple. I love these very simple practices. Take your palm, place it on your belly, or both palms, place them on your belly, and then just gently breathe into your palms with no pressure. You just allow your breath on its own to just tune into your palms being on the belly. And what that does is it brings your whole breathing back down to your core, to your root. You mustn't force it in any way. You don't even need, you just put your hands there and you allow your breath just to find its way down to your palms in its own time. A few minutes doing that, and things begin to kind of, your whole system begins to sort of calm, and it's particularly good for anxiety. It's the simplest way of bringing anxiety down in your system. It takes a little while, depends on the level of anxiety you have running through you. But it's a beautiful thing, because what happens is, when we were young children, when we were babies particularly, we breathe from our belly. If you hold a child's belly, you're a very young child, you'll see that all the breath just moves from the belly. It's incredible. That's addictive. If you can like hold a child's belly, like just put your hand on it, it's like, wow, the whole being is breathing from there. And we have that breath inside us. So when you place your palms just simply on your belly, and you come back to that, it starts to kind of reactivate that memory inside us. And again, the more you do a practice like that, the more your body remembers. And you can do it on others as well. You can place your hand on their belly and allow their breath to just come back to that. It's incredibly healing. It's a wonderful thing to do to someone you love and someone who trusts you. I mean, not everyone will want to have their hands on their belly if they're a stranger, for sure, but someone you love, it's a beautiful thing to do. And you know, brings peace of mind. So anyway, that's a little tip from me.
Yeah, the holy breath. So this going back to this work question, yeah, and not so much what we're doing, but how we're doing it. If we're doing it with our connection to our spirit, through our feminine sensitivity, with that masculine certainty of who we are, yeah, anchored in the breath. Jesus taught, in the old Hebrew word for breath and spirit was the same thing. So Jesus called it the holy breath a lot, as well as the Holy Spirit. So using the breath as an anchor for your concentration to stay connected to spirit, to the deeper world within yourself. And this is like the direct route. If you can breathe the love of God into your world while you're doing it. I focus a lot on breathing, inhaling and taking that love and light, exhaling and giving that love and light. If you can get into that rhythm and consistently do that, like this freedom day. If I was doing that freedom day, I'd have everyone just doing that all day while Rich is talking whatever he wants to say.
Exactly. Well,
breathe the Holy Spirit. Breathe the Holy Spirit. Breathe the Holy Spirit. And then they're walking out with 8 hours of constant breath connection to the continuity of their spiritual integrity. That's transformational right there, because you're bringing the infinite into your body world. You're bringing the infinite in there. That's what's going to make the difference. So I focus a lot on that. It's very important. Use the breath as the anchor. When people are living in fear, which most people are, the breath becomes very, very shallow. So they're locked into that sympathetic response. So the belly breathing that Rich is talking about, it's fundamentally wonderful to reactivate that capacity to breathe. Because if you're not, when you're living in fear, people are, whatever they're doing, it's like they're running away from something, or they there's going to be a confrontation. Yeah, it's a dreadful way to exist. And unfortunately, the vast majority of modern civilization is existing in that way. But it needs more than the physiological benefits of just deep breathing. It needs this spiritual connection, this awareness to this infinite power within ourselves. That's the problem. That's what's missing from our surface lives. And without that, you've got everything's a distortion. People are doing their best. When we talk about just that word love, for example, people are doing their best, and it has to begin with, you can't bring that spiritual love into your life if you don't deeply and completely love and accept yourself just the way you are. And a lot of these shadows, people, the ego will use that as an excuse for self-hatred, for self-loathing. It's absolutely astonishing when you really ask the questions, when you're working with clients, like the people that I work with, and I work with droves of individuals every day. I'm on it. When you really, really ask the question, nearly everyone's stuck in self-loathing, a form of self-loathing. They're impatient and angry with themselves. They have no tolerance. They treat themselves far, like I always use this analogy, when they're trying to change their lives. Yeah, they've been in this pattern for years, and now they're like awakening, and so now they want to do something different. And then they start, proceeding in that direction somewhat, taking some rudimentary steps in the direction they want to go. But they fall down, they make mistakes, they regress, or all kinds of stuff. And I use this analogy of, if you're teaching, your child, a baby child, to walk, and it's taking its first, teetering steps, and it's falling over, every now and again. What are you going to do? Are you going to start kicking it around the room, or are you, just because you can't walk at first go, or are you going to pick it up and, actually help it, support it along a bit? Of course, you're going to, and therefore, well, of course I'm going to help it. Well, you're not doing that to yourself. You're becoming very violent and critical towards yourself, like just because you can't, you're not like a spiritual master after doing, breathing for 2 minutes. It requires a bit more of a demonstration of compassion and love for oneself. So this is a really good beginning place, So my work focuses fundamentally on the breath, anchoring back to spirit. So you have this continuity and focus for your mind and for your consciousness, and then gently, lovingly embracing yourself with all your bits that hitherto you haven't been embracing. Deep love and self-acceptance. That's what the emotional freedom technique is founding on. That tapping, even though I'm an alcoholic, I deeply and completely love and accept myself just the way I am. And all of these shadows, the reason they have a gift in them is when you start loving you and accepting you and embracing yourself for this, in this shadow world, it's so much love is released. If you can move from self-loathing to self-love, it's a phenomenal journey. That's a whole life, a soul deep life lived right there, just in that movement, regardless of what you're doing in the world. So I teach a lot about the layers. There's the surface level of self that needs embracing, the deep love and self-acceptance. And then there's this very much this belly world, which is the emotional reservoir of the subconscious mind. It's the inner child, the wounded inner child. That's where all the compassion, the ho'oponopono, the love and self-acceptance and forgiveness needs to be channeled with the breath in there. So that inner child is feeling nourished by you. That's all your memories, your hidden memories, everything you've forgotten, all the thoughts and words and actions, the feeling states, the vibrations of it all that are embedded in your belly world. That all needs breathing better with love. And then there's that deeper element that Rich was talking about before, the ancestral connection, which is embedded in our DNA and in our soul, in the ancestral soul matrix. And that's where we need forgiveness prayers. And when you're doing the work on yourself, you quite quickly can move through your personal stuff, no matter how traumatic it is. Relatively quickly you can move through as you go through the levels of yourself, you move through the personal world, that deep love and self-acceptance for yourself as a person in the world, and then into that memory world, all the stuff you've forgotten. Some of it you haven't, but most of it you have. Just that ho'oponopono in there, the pure compassion towards yourself. But then you go into this impersonal world. And this is where the enormous amount of content is in the collective unconscious. And what I've learned, I don't know when you've come across this, Rich, but what I've learned is that the nature of this stuff is to rise to the surface so it can be integrated, so it can be transformed, so it can be transmuted. We have to look at this stuff from our hidden past. Not just our own stuff, but then there's this deeper impersonal world, and I liken it to like a well, and there's a river flowing in the darkness at the bottom of that well, and that river is the river of collective unconscious, unresolved trauma, negative energy, all the thoughts, words, actions, and feeling states that don't resonate with love. That stuff stays in the collective unconscious pool of humanity, and it's our responsibility to transmute and transform that with love. And what it's always, as soon as you start to awaken, this is another misnomer on the spiritual path, that it's all, fairies and crystals, and as soon as you're awakening, your life suddenly, it's like having the fairy godmother touch it with the magic wand, and you live happily ever after. But as everyone knows, you get your ass kicked, a royal ass kicking, sign up for, just a deconstruction of your life before there's a real, consolidation of a new you. And one of the things that happens when people awaken is the light at the top of the well gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And as soon as that river of darkness sees an exit point, to the surface of human consciousness, it's coming up. So it's one of the reasons why it's so challenging. The spiritual path is so challenging, because you're not just dealing with your own stuff, you're dealing with the collective unconscious. You become a servant, whether you like it or not, whether you realize it or not, to transmuting a lot of the collective unconscious. Do you follow that, what I just said? That makes sense?
Absolutely. You wanted to say something, Ronnie?
Well, I wanted to hear your response, but I just wanted to create a sacred pause and just check in real quick with you, because I know that where you're at, it's really late, and I just wanted to check in on our time and what your time availability or your time limits are to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I'm cool. I'm cool for going a little further. So let's follow it.
Great. Then let's follow the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think that was really really true. Actually, what you've just been saying there, Nick. That the wider you open your consciousness to the light, the greater the shadow. It's again an old story, and in a way that has to, we each come and we have the amount of karma that we are given is exactly the amount that we can handle. No more, no less. It's the perfect challenge for us. Yeah. For our stage.
Which is always a little bit more than we feel we can.
Very true. It feels like it's too much. I mean, one thing I can say as a encouragement, I think, is that there are kind of years, there are phases where you feel like you're in a tunnel and you're doing this work and it feels like it's endless, and you just feel like it's just, when is this ever going to end? Does this ever get better? And it does. Yeah. But the magical thing, the kind of, the warrior has his or her weapons, and like it's the shield and the sword and those things, and in a way, like one of the most magical weapons is patience. Yeah. I am a great teacher of, I'm not a great teacher, but I'm a teacher of great patience. Like I am, like, patience is, it's not a popular teaching, right? So, yeah. If I left behind like one of the core words for what I hope I can bring to this planet, it's patience. To help people become patient.
In the gene keys, bro, the patience, that word in the, which gene key is it?
It's gene key 5, which is about, it goes impatience, patience, timelessness.
Yeah, timelessness. So the thing about this is that patience, if you're connected to the timelessness, which only comes through connecting to the infinite, to the eternal within yourself, it's far easier to become patient than if you're not. If you're stuck in this time that's being compressed by all these forces, and it feels like it's stuff just spinning out of
people
space.
Kind of, and people sort of like to say, "Oh, I'm so impatient. I'm such an impatient person," and you might want to change that language, because there are layers to patience. There's that kind of forced patience. So you feel like I ought to be more patient. It's like that's a stage, and there is a thing that I call deep patience, and deep patience is more akin to trust. And it's like when you do that belly breathing we were talking of, or when you come into one of those pauses, you contact deep patience, and it is the field of love. Actually, that's what it is. That's what patience is. Patience is simply the field of love, but it's self-love. It's the trust in the cosmos. That's why that 5th gene key is the universal pattern of life. It's the rhythms of life are contained in that gene key, in that code, in our DNA. It's that code that connects us to all life forms and to the pulse of life and the rhythm of life in all forms. And that rhythm is, it has many, many nuances in different forms, but there's a central pulse, like the pulse of our heart. That pulse is moving through all beings all the time. You know, as we're being born, as we're dying, as we're, you know, that pulse is continuous. It's this continuous, beautiful, connecting pulse that is at the heart of every galaxy, of every cell, of every being, of every dimensional being that we can't see with our senses. It is a central kind of coalescing factor of life. So when you come into that place of groundedness, that's what you feel, and you immediately feel patient, but you don't sort of say, oh, I'm being patient. you just are. You just go, well, I'm not in a hurry. Why would I be in a hurry? You know, what it's like, why would I try and be quicker than life? Why, you know, life is perfect. Like, everything will come as it comes. So what I was saying is that every shadow that's coming up, every difficult period that we're moving through, there is a kind of arc to it, and there is a sort of perfection to it. We are in a process of acceptance, and acceptance takes, you know, a long time. The deeper the shadow, the harder it is to kind of really grasp and accept. And those, especially those deep ones that, as you said, come up from the well, and they're collective, and they don't seem to kind of make any sense to us. And we're like, well, you know, this seems harder than it should be. It's because we're kind of taking on a deeper slice of the world karma. And also that can manifest externally, you know, through kind of oppressive life circumstances that seem to kind of fall upon us. And actually, you know, one of the key sentences in Gene Keys is actually from a teaching I call the 7 Sacred Seals, which is a really beautiful part of the Gene Keys synthesis. And the key to that teaching is this one-liner: suffering is grace. And I tell you, that sentence will change your life if you take that in deeply. Suffering is grace. Because it doesn't seem like it, you know, it really does not seem like it. And I don't say that in a trite way, because I know there are people out there who are suffering terribly, and, you know, way more than I have, or, you know, ever have possibly. But there's a grain, there's a kernel in that suffering, and there's something of beauty somewhere hidden inside it. And one day that person will find out what that was and what that is, you know, and they may not even be in this life, but there's something in it of beauty, of worth, of you know, of kind of essence, an essence of awareness, of greatness, even of beauty. But it doesn't, you know, you just don't see it always right away, you know, but the soul sees it at somewhere, at some level, at some point. So it's a deep thing to kind of take in, that suffering, which seems so hard, actually offers us so much. It's a worldview. There's a different, you know, I encourage anyone listening to this to kind of just consider that for yourself, like that worldview, shifting that worldview from suffering is terrible, I must escape it, to suffering is grace. It can actually take me where I need to go, where my soul yearns to go. And in fact, that's the only place it can take you, when you listen to it deeply. You have to really listen to it inside you, and also inside others. You know, you have to look at the world through that lens of your heart, and that softening lens. And then, you know, things really, really change around you. I mean, I find that.
And I think there's a lot of good news in the truth that there's a part of us that isn't suffering at all, never has been, never will be. It just exists beyond all this suffering realm. And there's another little breath that I'd like to share. This was gifted to me by Baba G, one of the greats. And it goes with that alternate nostril breathing and the belly breath with the compassion. And then when your central nervous system has really kicked into parasympathetic, and you feel that you actually are genuinely relaxing, which can happen very quickly, really within 3 breaths if you do it right. Then the secret is when you're breathing in, to imagine you're breathing out. And when you're breathing out, to imagine you're breathing in. And what happens is it puts you into this little space between the in-breath and the out-breath. And you can just move out of this suffering realm, which is a realm, and it's full of suffering for a very, very, very good reason. And one of the reasons is to remind consciousness that it doesn't actually like being in here, and it needs to go away into the realm where it's supposed to be, having the best day ever. And it just lets you, detach a little bit from this mental, emotional, physical world. So the secret is when you're breathing in, imagine you're breathing out. When you're breathing out, imagine you're breathing in. Focus on the stillness. You are the stillness is you. And there's this what I call a synchronicity point between the in-breath and the out-breath, where you have this direct connection with your spiritual freedom, your spiritual purity, your spiritual integrity. And you can enjoy soaking your little soul in there and slurping up some good stuff before you naturally oscillate back into the mad world where all the crazy stuff's going on. So I do a lot of that. It's essential. It's a really good thing. You can take chronic cases that have been stuck in all kinds of trauma for years and give them their first taste of spiritual freedom that they've ever had in this lifetime, and it's remarkable the impact of that.
Thank you for that. I want to just kind of pop in here, and I'm aware that we've been going almost 2 hours, and
Wow.
This is kind of just like flown by. Let's
just go all night. Come on, Rex. This is the big moment, bro. If we just go all night, we'll shift the whole thing tonight. It'll be saved. You can retire in the morning.
Like one of those performances of James Joyce's Ulysses, like go on for 24
hours. That's incredibly, I guess if Richard was on board with that, it's incredibly tempting for me. In all seriousness, I could.
I'm gonna give our listeners a pause. I think.
Yeah.
We can. I empathize with them.
We can. Yeah. Well, for everyone listening, that does bring up a really important point about integration, right? Because the thing about the internet, and I've fallen into this in social media, is that we live in an age of information. So we have every single bit of information on every single topic conceivable by the human mind available at the fingertip, where on one end you can become complacent with so much information, and on another end it can be challenging to integrate it if you're constantly going through the noosphere of the human psyche and constantly going through the mind and trying to take in so much information. There is something to be said, and maybe that's a perfect kind of concluding topic to get both your perspective on. There is a lot to be said about the integration, and the word trauma has been brought up a few times, and this is something I study, whether it's trauma-based conditions. I've been really going deep into psychological, emotional, and physiological trauma in Dr. Gabor Mate's work, if you're familiar with him. And one of the perspectives that he shares on the nature of trauma is that ultimately what a trauma is it's a separation or a division that's been created with an individual, their psyche, because of the traumatic effect, but it's not the event in of itself that the mind remembers or recirculates. It's the actual separation. So that must mean in order for someone to heal, another word for healing could actually be integration, right? Integration, the diametrically opposed archetypes, or integrating the psyche, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot to be said about integrating information, integrating insights, contemplation, In other words, Richard, which is such a hallmark of all of your teachings, you really recommend people actually pause and they contemplate. And so the last thing I want to say before I hand it off to both of you for concluding perspectives is I want to bring up the work of Ken Wilber. And, you know, one of the things that I got from the philosopher Ken Wilber in his integral theory philosophy is this idea of transcendence and inclusion. And so, you know, for example, when you're going through transformation or you're going through the rungs of the ladder, the tendency for a lot of people, myself included, the tendency had been to try to escape the old version of myself, to escape my shadow, to not integrate the disowned parts of myself until I started to understand that if I wanted to transcend myself, I had to also include myself at the same time. So this idea of transcending and including, opposed to, you know, trying to get somewhere like spiritual ascension. I'm trying to get there, but I'm not bringing myself all the way through. So I want to, you know, hand that off in from the perspective of integration and whatever you think is really valuable to share on what I just said. I'd like to kind of make that the final kind of perspective for everyone.
Why don't you go, Nick, and I'll finish.
Good idea. Okay, well, Rudolf Steiner brought some great light into understanding what's actually going on in this energy world that we're in, where all this information, all these bits of information are available and so on and so forth. And he pulled a lot of his understanding from the mystical schools. And basically, this really works with my model. In this energy world, there's two opposing forces in dynamic tension with each other, but they're not opposing each other. They're not fighting against each other. They're providing the necessary tension required so that a space-time continuum can exist. One of those forces is a downward spiraling force, which pulls consciousness down into subhuman behavior. And both of those forces are extremely active right now. And so you see this downward spiraling force with the pedophiles and pornography and gluttony and all of this, you know, the debasement of our humanity, this preoccupation with blood, you know, bloodbath fights, mega fights, and all of this stuff. This is, and war, obviously. This is all a downward spiraling pulling force, which archetypally you could call satanic. But then there's an upward spiraling force, which provides the tension so that we can have this tension field, which is necessary for space-time to exist in eternity. So this upward spiraling force is the Lucifer, the false light. So a lot of these philosophies and ideologies and perspectives are part of this false light thing, where you just become too reliant on ideas, on mind, on I, that I have to do something or be something. And that if we just have more technology, the more technology we have, the better we're going to be, and all the rest of it. More is this upward spiraling thing. So the secret is, this whole thing is absolutely perfect. This is like the toroidal activity. Yeah, we've seen that represented in models, the toroid, for the consciousness to stay absolutely in the center. And this notion of the pause, of integration, you're not trying to integrate all this information that you're receiving from the world, because there's an infinite amount of it going to be pouring into you. If anyone who's done any, real study whatsoever gets to a point where it's just like saturation. It's just like, there's just so many perspectives, which none of them are any more valid necessarily than any other. And this is, in the Chinese wisdom teachings, this is when the master realizes that he knows nothing. He becomes innocent again. And we can't, it's not possible, because that whole thing, all the energy of that is part of the energy we world, which exists beyond that. So the secret is to resist the forces that are pulling you down or that are pulling you up within your own mental world, and stay in the center with the breath, connected to that spiritual essence, which is pure love and light within you. And that's the practice. And that's how you integrate everything. That's how you integrate it all. And you start to pull in pure light into you, which doesn't require bits of information to be, broken down into bits of information. You can just absorb. The soul can take pure light. And that's what illumination, that's what enlightenment is. You become awakened. You can see things, you understand things, you can see what's going on, and everything becomes, quite simple. So we have to be careful. And this Luciferian thing has got so many people at the moment, these extremely complex ideas and models, and then people think, oh, I have to, learn this or do this for X number of decades to become a master at it. Whereas really, we just have to move through that center into a connection with who we truly and eternally are. And we can do that quite simply through the breath, without even having a particularly mental process about it. So that's what I feel is the most effective way to integrate everything when you're using non-linear strategies. You're not using the mind. You're not using the mind to do the integrative.
Yeah, nicely said, Nick. I think it does come back down to the physical, to the body. The body is the thing that integrates, is the field that, the physical body, the field that integrates. And so you have all these subtle layers, these kind of higher spiritual layers, and then these mental layer, the emotional layer, the etheric layers, and then the physical itself. You get right down to the the material realm. Excuse me. And that's the last place where things are kind of deeply integrated. And I think it's probably the challenge of our time, in a way, particularly in the sort of awakening communities around the world. Is our challenge is to kind of bring the spiritual knowledge down into the earth plane, and rather than kind of ascend up and kind of go out, is to bring it down and in and into the body, into our hands, into our hearts, into our relationships, into our families, into all the places that we probably don't really want to be sometimes, into the kind of the real kind of grit of the earth, because that's where the spiritualization of matter is the kind of is what I'm talking about. This is what you've been talking about as well. These two forces, and it's really important to stay grounded and earthed and in the world. And many people who are kind of on spiritual paths, make that mistake in a way, and it's probably it probably is a phase for many people, although some people do sit there for some time, is to be kind of what ordinary people call real. When I say ordinary people, you know what I mean? Like, to be real, to be able to communicate with a regular human being, and to be able to, to be with people, because sometimes a spiritual path can alienate you, it can isolate you from others, and that's not a kind of healthy spiritual path for me. A healthy spiritual path is found in life, and we haven't perhaps had so many role models, because many of our teachers and masters don't live that kind of life. They've lived sort of sadhu lives, or lives up there where they're kind of in their ashrams, or on the mountaintops, and we kind of pray at their feet and things. But the really good role models, I think, are the ones that really live in the world and kind of play in the theater of the world, and kind of take risks in that, and are less easy to define, and kind of humbler, perhaps, in some way, more human. And I think that's the most important thing, is never to lose our humanity, never to lose that kind of, touch of, I mean, we can get so into like, I've got to eat pure foods, everything's got to be just like, I've got to go on this ascension path, and then we sort of sometimes miss the point, of like, there's beautiful things in this world, and that can, once you've kind of caught some of that light, bring it back down to earth and share it with others, but share it kind of with them as a human being, as a normal human, as a regular person. There's such a treasure in that as a teaching, I think. And I do think it is that is our integration, is to be humans. And we can be divine as well. But to be a divine human is to bring it down to earth, and to live it in a family, and to do as other people do, and I don't mean like, go to the movies and eat in restaurants, and just not all the time, but necessarily there's no kind of rules, but just to be able to connect with regular people,
right?
So that you don't alienate yourself. That's such an important thing.
Yeah, I think, Richard, I think that's a very, very important point to all of this, because I know in my own experience, I've gone through a lot of those phases, and not having a roadmap, not having a disclaimer about it. So I've had to kind of navigate it without actually understanding the phase or the cycle, and having to learn about it through retrospect. And one of the things that did occur is that alienation and that isolation and that identity crisis, and really like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do in the world? Who am I? Why am I even here? I can't even talk to like regular people, but I'm a public speaker, and I'm a teacher, and I'm a coach, and this is what I'm here to do. And yet I'm having a communication barrier and a judgmental barrier between my own judgments and other people that in the Harry Potter language we might call muggles, which I find quite amusing, or whatever these subtle judgments might be that create division. In noticing that within myself, the more spiritual I became, the more judgmental I became at the same time, and then I had to learn about discern the difference between discernment and judgment, and being more discerning without being judgmental.
Yes, perfect, beautiful. Absolutely agree with that.
Wow. Well, what an incredible, this has been it's been literally 2 hours. I'm looking at the clock. We have hit the 2-hour mark. Gentlemen, this has been absolutely incredible. To conclude, I would like to just get both of your references for the Gene Keys, and also for you, Nick, your work in the Ultimate Focus program. In particular, I know we didn't get to go into that. Maybe we can take a minute or two for you to actually share that with people, because you gifted that to me.
Nick Good Transformations, mate. Nick Good Transformations.
NickGoodTransformations.com.
Yeah. And if anyone's been listening to what we've just been saying, it's all about that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Awesome. And then Richard, where can they find the Gene Keys and any other references you want to share?
Yeah, just genekeys.com. That'll do it, and you can get my book on Amazon. So, just put in Gene Keys and you'll find it there.
Okay.
And the other books as well.
And then your contemplation book that comes out in January, is that available for pre-order?
Not yet, but it'll be on Amazon in January, early January, I hope.
Okay, fantastic. Let's all get ourselves copies of that and go to both of these gentlemen's resources. I have steeped myself in both of their work, and I get to be the participatory fly on the wall in this conversation. It's been an honor. Thank you so much to both of you. And it's just been an honor.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you, Nick. Thanks for bringing us together.
Blessings. Love you guys. Thank you so much.
And thank you, everyone, for bearing with us.
Wonderful. Have a